Hello TSARISTs, and welcome back to the third Soviet Dev Diary. So for those who have been with us, we've covered the standard historical communist path with Stalin, we've gone through some alternative communist paths with Trotsky and Bukharin, and now it's time for something a little bit different. As I'm sure you all remember, the line travelling away from an alternative form of communism went off to the right, and that is where this Dev Diary begins. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So this week's Dev Diary is, well, it's quite different to previous Dev Diaries. The last two were very, very big. This one is, I'd say, considerably shorter, and it begins by talking about reminding us that different parts of the Soviet focus tree were built by different content designers, and there is no exception for the alternative history part. After we pass that initial reminder, we go straight into the content in question, about what it really does mean for the alternative path, and I should say path singular is going to start in the Far East. This is because the white movement was sort of dispersed far away out of the grip of Stalin and moved away to Manchuria, which is under the control of Puyi, but is also under the control of the Japanese. It's kind of complicated. Regardless of which path you're planning to take further down the line, your story begins in the Far East, in Siberia. And it's with that we get a look at the alternative focus branch for the Soviet Union, which, as I say, is surprisingly just one branch. Everything is in this single branch, beginning with beaten but not defeated. It then takes a split down two paths, but culminates again at the bottom when you need to reconvene the Zemsky Zoba. For those who are interested, this entire branch consists of 51 focuses, with slightly more focuses on the right side as opposed to the monarchist side, but it's about the same across the board. And the fates we have at the end to decide between are the Romanov Restoration on the left, and the more right-wing path to follow on the right. For the eagle-eyed among you, I'm sure you've noticed that there isn't any very strict democratic path in any of this. And there isn't. There is no democratic path, period, for the Soviet Union. I feel I should address this at the start because, well, I'm just as surprised as you are, to be honest. The devs said that in explanation it's because there was a much greater focus on the historical and communist paths, and they really wanted to make sure that the predominant focus of people playing the Soviet Union was to take the communist route. The non-communist alt history path was sort of just an additional thing. I'm sure many of you are disappointed about the lack of a democratic path. I remember I did a poll about it, and I think the second most favoured option was for democracy. So, disappointing for some, but that's what we're lumped with. But regardless, let's carry on and focus on our monarchist and right-wing paths with the build-up towards a civil war, because like it or lump it, the only way we're going to get rid of the Soviets is with another civil war to correct the wrong of a certain uprising. The Dev Diary describes how, in comparison to the alternative communist branch, the build-up for gaining support for the Tsars and the right-wing is a little bit more difficult. Sort of far more fringe in terms of Russian society at this point, so you're not really going to get the NKVD or a large part of the army on your side. It's going to have to be very much so a grassroots movement. So, following on from this, the focuses you take leading towards a civil war are going to be about building that underground support in the Far East and making sure that the different states and the people who live there are on your side when you eventually start up. We have one example here where you have to approach a former Russian advisor working in Manchukuo to bring him back, as he's going to help us with some cavalry, and travelling across the Far Easts of Russia, maybe some horses could come in handy. On the right side of the preparing for the Civil War branch, we have religion, which is of course another key component of a counter-Soviet thought mindset, because the Soviets, well, religion wasn't really their priority, it has to be said, and so taking the position of Article 124, you can ensure that the separation between the church was actually an elimination and get the people on your side. One of the focuses we can see on the right side of the path is rebuilding the Saviour Cathedral, which was demolished instead for the Palace of the Soviets. I wonder if this is going to be a focus you take after defeating the Soviets, or are you rebuilding a Saviour Cathedral in the Far East? I'm not sure. I would find it funny if Stalin suddenly decided to completely destroy the big Soviet palace and randomly build a cathedral there. Who knows why madmen do what they do. Once you've built up enough support from the underground, as well as ensuring that the religious figures are on your side, you can take the focus the hands do, which gets the event the Soviet Civil War, and so begins your long trek into the west to retake Moscow. The Dev Diary makes no secret about this being possibly the most difficult path for you to take. I mean, I can imagine it already. There's not particularly much resources and industry in the Far East, so collecting as much as you can is going to have to be done very well. But if you are struggling and you feel you need some extra help, there are two focuses that allow you to appeal to foreign countries for aid. The first one isn't so bad, in which you just ask for some minor help. The second one, though, is a request an imperial protection, which has the downfall of perhaps conceding most of your territory on the Pacific coast in favour for full Japanese support. It also runs the risk that once you do commit to Japanese support, they may create an imperial protectorate of you, effectively making you a puppet state. I guess if this war against the Soviets isn't going to plan, becoming a pawn of the Japanese might be your best option. The Dev Diary makes no inclination as to whether you can then become free again after you've got the Japanese help, or stab them in the back, or perhaps you'll long to live out the rest of your days as a pawn of the Japanese. I simply do not know. Regardless, once the Civil War has been won and things have returned to some stability, the first person you'll need to elect for your provisional government is the Tsar. The Tsar in question will be of the House of Romanov, Vladimir I. Here we can see an image of the wonderful procession going on, but it does hark in the back of my mind about that lack of an alternative option. There's sadly no discussions of alternative monarchs or alternative forms of government that could occur. This is maybe where I feel like a more civilian population would rise up and bring about some democratic rule, but unfortunately we've got quite a solidly straight path. No alternative monarchs, no alternative leaders. Never mind. So, once you've found some stability in the country and elected the Tsar as your provisional leader, you then get to decide whether you want to continue down with the restoration of the Romanovs or take a spin to the right to Rodzewski. The Dev Diary doesn't talk about too much what these different branches entail, so I'm going to do some personal speculation from the easiest points. I think Vengeance for the Oak is probably going to be about clearing up Tanatuva and Mongolia and making sure they remain under your control, as well as Westward Bound ensuring that the different parts of surrounding territory are 100% under your control, with a quick war against Finland and the Baltics. On the left we have reinstitute the Mesnitchtetstvo, which is the feudal hierarchical system of the pre-Soviet Russian times, although the focus underneath it, My Brother's Keeper, I'm not really sure what that's about, so feel free to tell me what you think it's about. But most importantly is the focus at the bottom, Pan-Slavic nationalism, which we are told what it's about. Pan-Slavic nationalism will allow you to go to different countries, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Yugoslavia and Bulgaria, all Slavic countries, and ask them if they want to become members of a Pan-Slavic union. Anybody who agrees, you get to annex, and anybody who disagrees, you get to invade. This goes on to allow you to unlock decisions, assuming they decline, allowing you to integrate them into part of your empire and eventually declare the Pan-Slavic Union, which one assumes would allow you to get cores over much of Eastern Europe. The path to the right we know very little about other than two of its key focuses, ensuring that the embarrassments under the Japanese are repaid, as well as building up a Far Eastern naval fleet. We do have some inkling into what you can do with the intervention in the Americas focus, which allows you to create a faction called the North Pacific Treaty Organization. With it, 15 different countries are going to get some daily fascist support, as well as being able to influence them to become fascist and join your faction. This seems very much so like it's building up to a war against the Americas, a little bit early. Other than that, it seems a little, surprisingly empty, to be honest. I'm very surprised there's absolutely no interaction with the German Reich or any other movements, Italy. It feels like very independent from the events of Europe, so I'm interested to see what some of these focuses actually do, or if it's perhaps as lacking in some parts as I think it might be. Regardless of whether you've gone down the left branch or the right branch, in the end you will have the option, if you choose to work towards the third Rome. This will allow the head of the Orthodox Church to elevate themselves to the position as the defier of the sun god and the supreme representative of God on earth. This gives you some stability buffs, some war support buffs, some attack buffs. Other than that, I'm not sure about coring anything or adding new territory, but your country will be called the Third Rome, and I don't think anybody can be disappointed with that. And so with that ends the final part of the Soviet Dev Diary. They do talk about how there is still more work to be done, some things they want to change. But yes, as I said, just one branch for the alternative history, so no democracy, I'm afraid to say. But I'm not too worried about that because of the next section, which is a personal favourite of mine, talking about new releasable nations and a little bit about formable nations. In this, they've added an absolute ton of possible releasable countries, SSRs, ASSRs, okrugs, little republics, you name it. It's all here in this image. I can't help but look at the Caucasus region and think about how is that like 9 countries down there, all bordering each other? You've got 5 countries here just chilling in the central of the Russians. It even looks like the Central Asian area has been carved up quite a bit more. Uzbekistan's been turned into some sort of spaghetti town. In the far west, we of course have some new things as well. We've got Karelia near Murmansk. A little bit disappointed that Murmansk isn't independent, but I'll live. As well as Ukraine, I think is lacking Crimea, including the northern bit of Crimea, just above inside the mainland Ukraine. So yeah, that is a much bigger Crimea. The only thing I'll mention, which is a little bit surprising that other people have mentioned, is the lack of Cubans, specifically the Don Republic. I personally am quite surprised to see that the region down here doesn't have a Don Republic. I thought there might have been one, especially with so many other far more obscure tags, but I guess you can't have everything. In addition, they also mentioned that there will be new formables for these countries, including Idel Ural. As far as I can tell, Idel Ural is going to be the 5 countries hiding in the centre of Russia, creating places like Tatarstan into this state. Goodness me, the border call. I love it. And so with that, we reach the end of the Dev Diary. There's still more things to talk about, but I'm going to leave it there because I think the Soviet tree is still being worked on in parts. For example, there's no portraits for any of the leaders yet. I'm interested to hear what you think about this new sub-branch, what you think about the monarchist path, what you think about the right path, what would you change, what would you add? Are you upset about the lack of democracy? But regardless, we'll come back to this, and for now I'll say thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Kalinka, 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 Baya.